I fell in love with my boss in the cornfield when he lifted his shirt. It was supposed to be just another long afternoon on the farm, the kind of day when the sun burned hot above the endless rows of corn and the silence pressed down heavier than the soil itself. I thought I knew every routine, every movement, every unspoken rule between us. But then he did something small, something unexpected. That changed everything. Standing there in the middle of the cornfield, my boss lifted his shirt to wipe the sweat from his face, and in that single moment, I saw him differently. It wasn't just about strength or work anymore. It was about the way my heart stumbled in my chest, the way the world seemed to slow down, as if daring me to admit what I felt. That was the instant I realized I was falling for him, and nothing would ever be the same again. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way you'll never miss another story filled with suspense, emotion, and life-changing revelations. Stay with me, because what happened next in that cornfield was more than just attraction. It was the start of something dangerous, tender, and unforgettable. The sun beat down on the rows of corn like it had something to prove, baking the soil and painting everything in a relentless golden glare. I had been working on a farm for only 3 weeks, but it already felt like the land had claimed me. Dust under my nails, sweat soaking my shirt, blisters forming in the creases of my hands. Still, there was something grounding about it, something that quieted the noise in my head. My boss, Ethan, was the kind of man who made silence heavy. He wasn't much older than me, maybe 28 in my 24, but he carried himself like the land had shaped him into something both unbreakable and unreachable. He didn't waste words. He didn't need to. When he spoke, people listened, not because he demanded it, but because his presence filled the space before his voice ever did. That day, the work was harder than usual. The heat was suffocating, and the stalks seemed taller than ever, enclosing us in a world of green and gold. I tried to keep pace, hauling feed, clearing brush, anything to prove I could handle it. Ethan had taken a risk hiring me. I was new to this, a city kid who had barely touched dirt before stepping onto his land. But I wanted to prove myself, to show him I belonged. Around midday, we stopped in the middle of the field to catch our breath. Ethan set down the tools, his broad shoulders rising and falling with each inhale. His shirt clung to his chest, soaked through with sweat. Without a word, he reached down, grabbed the hem, and lifted it up to wipe his face. It should have been nothing, just a practical gesture, but the sight of it knocked the air from my lungs. His stomach, taut and sculpted from years of work, caught the sunlight. Muscles I'd only half noticed before now seemed carved, glistening with sweat. The act was so natural, so unself-conscious, yet to me it felt like a revelation. I looked away too quickly, my face hot, my chest tight. But it was too late. I'd felt the shift inside me, the recognition that what I felt for Ethan wasn't just admiration, it was desire. He must have noticed something, because when I dared to glance back, his eyes were on me. Not hard, not judging, just watching, for a second too long. Then he dropped his shirt back into place and reached for his water jug, as if nothing had happened. The silence pressing again, heavier than the sun. My hands fidgeted, desperate for something to do. Finally, I forced myself to speak. How much longer do we usually stay out here? Ethan glanced at the sky, squinting against the light. Depends. We still got another hour before we head back. His voice was steady, low, the kind that carried without effort. I nodded, swallowing hard. Got it. We went back to work, but my rhythm was off. Every time he moved, I felt aware of him in ways I hadn't before. The way his hands gripped the tools, the way his shirt stretched across his back when he bent down, the way his jaw clenched in concentration. I hated myself for noticing, for letting it mean something. He was my boss. I was here to work, not to feel this. Still, the image of him lifting his shirt burned in my mind. By the time we finished, the sun was low, staining the sky with streaks of red and orange. We loaded the tools into the truck, the silence between us louder than any words. As we drove back toward the farmhouse, the cool evening air drifted in through the open windows, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. When we pulled up, Ethan cut the engine and stepped out. I followed, my legs stiff from the day. He leaned against the truck for a moment, pulling off his gloves, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You did good today," he said finally. The compliment caught me off guard. I turned to him, searching his face for sarcasm, but there was none. His eyes were steady, sincere. "Thanks," I said, my voice too soft. He nodded, looking away again. "Not everyone makes it through the first month out here. The work breaks people down. But you keep pushing." Something in his tone made my chest ache. It wasn't just praise. It was acknowledgement, the kind I'd been chasing since I got here. I wanted to say something back, something meaningful, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me all afternoon. "Why did you hire me? You could have found someone with more experience." He glanced at me then, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if weighing how much to say. "Because you looked like you needed a chance," he said simply. "And because I know what it's like to need one." The honesty in his voice left me speechless. Before I could respond, he pushed off the truck and walked toward the house, his steps slow but steady. That night, lying in the small room he'd given me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every detail. The way he looked at me when I caught him watching, the weight in his words when he admitted why he'd hired me, the curve of his stomach in the sunlight. My chest tightened, torn between guilt and something deeper, something I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was just exhaustion, just the heat and the long hours messing with my head. But when I closed my eyes, I saw him again, standing in the cornfield, lifting his shirt. And the way my body reacted told me the truth. I was already falling for him. The thought terrified me. He was my boss, a man who had taken me in when I needed work, who trusted me enough to bring me here. If I let these feelings show, it could ruin everything. But the more I tried to bury it, the more it grew. And deep down, I knew the question wasn't whether I could hide it. It was what would happen when I couldn't anymore. Because the way he looked at me today, it wasn't nothing. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan knew it too. The next morning came with a heaviness that had nothing to do with the work. I woke up in the small guest room Ethan had given me, sunlight spilling through thin curtains, and the first thought that filled my mind wasn't the chores ahead. It was the image of him, in that cornfield, shirt lifted, sweat tracing down his stomach. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing away, but it clung to me like the smell of earth in my clothes. I dragged myself out of bed and into my boots, the wooden floor creaking beneath me. When I stepped into the kitchen, Ethan was already there, pouring black coffee into 2 chipped mugs. His movements were steady, practiced, like a man who had done the same thing every day for years. "Morning," he said, without looking up. "Morning." I replied, my voice lower than I meant. He slid a mug toward me. "Drink. Gonna be a long day." I wrapped my hands around it, the warmth sinking into my skin. The silence stretched again, thick with everything I couldn't say. He didn't seem bothered by it. He never did. But for me, it was unbearable. When we stepped outside, the sky was a clear, endless blue. The field stretched out in every direction, tall and imposing, and for a moment I felt swallowed by it all. Ethan grabbed a pair of gloves from the truck and tossed them to me. "We got fencing to fix on the north end," he said. We rode in silence, the truck rattling over the dirt road. Every so often, I'd steal a glance at him, the way his jaw tensed when he shifted gears, the curve of his forearm where the sunlight caught it. I hated myself for noticing, but I couldn't stop. At the north field, we unloaded supplies. The fence had been battered by last night's storm, posts leaning, wire sagging. We worked side by side, our movements falling into rhythm. He drove stakes into the ground with steady precision, while I held him upright, my arms burning from the effort. At one point, he wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and glanced at me. "Not bad," he said. The praise hit harder than it should have. I swallowed, trying to play it off. "Guess I'm learning." His lips curved slightly, almost a smile, before he turned back to the post. But the moment lodged in my chest, small but undeniable. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, until sweat soaked through both our shirts. My arms ached, my back screamed, but I refused to complain. I wanted him to see I could handle it. That I wasn't just some outsider pretending to belong here. When the last section of wire was stretched and fastened, Ethan stepped back, surveying our work. "That'll hold," he said, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. I leaned against a post, trying to catch my breath. "You ever think about leaving?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. He glanced at me, brows furrowed. "Leaving what?" "This place. The farm. All of it." He looked back at the horizon, his expression unreadable. "I've thought about it. But this land, it's in my blood. My father built it. His father before him. Walking away would feel like walking away from them." There was a weight in his voice, a gravity that made my chest tighten. I realized in how much this place defined him, how deep his roots went. I wanted to ask more, to peel back the layers he kept hidden, but before I could, a sudden crack split the air. We both froze. A fence post down the line had given way, the wire snapping loose and whipping violently. Ethan moved fast, but not fast enough. He caught the wire with his forearm, the sharp edge slicing across his skin. "Ethan!" I dropped the tools and rushed to him. Blood was already pooling, running down his arm. He grimaced, trying to brush it off. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing," I snapped, grabbing his wrist before he could pull away. My hands trembled as I pressed my shirt against the cut, trying to slow the bleeding. His skin was hot under my palms, his pulse thrumming against my fingers. Our eyes met then, closer than we'd ever been, and the world seemed to narrow to just that moment. The smell of sweat and earth, the sound of our breathing, the heat of his body under mine. Something flickered in his gaze, something I couldn't name but desperately wanted to. For a second, it felt like he might lean in, might bridge the gap that had been growing between us since the cornfield. But then he pulled back, breaking the connection. "I can handle it," he muttered, taking the cloth from me. The rejection stung, sharp and cold. I stepped back, my chest aching. "Fine." We finished the work in silence. When we drove back, he didn't say a word, and I didn't either. The weight of what almost happened hung between us, heavy and unspoken. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every second. The snap of the wire, the heat of his skin, the look in his eyes. I told myself I was imagining it, that I wanted it too much to see clearly. But deep down, I knew it had been real. The next morning, I found him in the barn, wrapping his arm with fresh bandages. He didn't look up when I entered. "Didn't sleep?" he asked, his tone flat. "Not much," I admitted. He tightened the bandage, his jaw set. "This place doesn't let you rest. You'll get used to it." I wanted to push, to demand he admit what had passed between us, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I picked up a pitchfork and joined him in silence. We worked side by side all day, the tension simmering just below the surface. Every glance, every brush of our shoulders, every shared silence felt loaded. It was unbearable and intoxicating all at once. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the fields glowed gold, he finally broke the silence. "You asked yesterday if I ever thought about leaving," he said quietly. I glanced at him, heart pounding. "Yeah." He looked out at the rows of corn, his expression distant. "Sometimes I wonder if staying means I'm stuck. If maybe I'm holding myself back." My breath caught. And what would leaving mean? He turned to me then, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my chest ache. It would mean risking everything I know, for something I don't. The air between us pulsed, electric. I wanted to speak, to say that maybe some risks were worth it. But before I could, he stepped back, his expression shuddered again. "Dinner's in 20, he said, walking toward the house. I stood there in the fading light, my heart heavy with everything unsaid. I knew then that this wasn't just about work or the farm or even the land. It was about us, about whatever this was growing between us, fragile and dangerous and undeniable. And as I watched him disappear into the farmhouse, I realized I was already too deep to turn back. Because I hadn't just fallen for the farm or the work or the life here. I had fallen for him. And the question that burned in me was whether he'd ever let himself fall too. Dinner that night was quiet, almost too quiet. The old farmhouse creaked with the weight of silence, the walls carrying every scrape of fork against plate, like it was shouting at me. Ethan sat across the table, his arm freshly bandaged, his eyes fixed on his food, but his mind somewhere far away. I wanted to break the silence, to ask what he was thinking, but every time I opened my mouth, the word stuck. Outside, the air grew heavy, thick with the warning of a storm. The sky had taken on a bruised shade of gray, thunder rumbling in the distance. I watched lightning streak across the horizon through the window, the light briefly catching the hard lines of Ethan's face. He looked carved out of stone, but his jaw flexed as if he was fighting something inside. "You should get some rest after this," he said finally, his voice low. I set my fork down. "So should you." He glanced up then, and for a split second, our eyes met. There was something there, unspoken, raw, dangerous. But just as quickly, he looked away, pushing back from the table. Before I could press him, the wind slammed against the house, rattling the windows. A loud crack split the night, followed by a bellowing sound from the fields. Ethan was on his feet instantly. "Fence must have given way," he muttered, grabbing his jacket. I followed him outside into the storm. Rain pelted us in sheets, soaking through my clothes in seconds. The corn stalks whipped violently in the wind, bending like they might break. In the distance, I saw them, cows scattered near the broken fence, panicked by the storm. "Get the gate!" Ethan shouted over the roar of the wind. I sprinted through the mud, my boots sinking with every step, while he grabbed a rope from the barn. Lightning lit up the field, and for a moment I saw him silhouetted against the chaos. Broad shoulders, steady hands, commanding even as the storm tried to tear everything apart. Together, we managed to corral the cattle, pushing them back through the gate and securing it with the rope. My muscles screamed, my chest heaving, but adrenaline pushed me forward. At one point, a young calf bolted toward the open field. I chased it, slipping in the mud, but before I could fall, Ethan's hand gripped my arm, steadying me. "You okay?" he shouted, his voice fierce but laced with something softer. I nodded, breathless. "Yeah." For a second, even in the storm, we lingered too close, his hand still on my arm, his eyes searching mine. The world around us blurred. The thunder, the rain, the frantic cattle. There was only him, only the heat of his hand burning against my skin. Then another crash of thunder broke the moment, and he pulled away, barking orders until the last of the cattle were secured. By the time we stumbled back into the house, drenched and exhausted, my body was trembling, not from the storm, but from the pull I couldn't ignore anymore. Ethan peeled off his soaked jacket, his shirt clinging to every line of his body. He dropped into a chair, running a hand through his wet hair. "Damn storm," he muttered. I stood there, dripping onto the floor, my heart still racing. That could have been a lot worse. He looked up at me then, his eyes dark and unreadable. It was bad enough. The silence that followed was suffocating. I wanted to ask why he always pulled back, why he never let me in. But before I could, a knock echoed at the door. We both froze. It was late, too late for visitors. Ethan stood slowly, his expression tightening. He opened the door, and a man in a soaked suit stepped inside, holding a leather folder. "Evening, Mr. Hayes," the man said smoothly. His tone was polite, but his eyes were cold. Ethan's jaw clenched. "What do you want, Dalton?" Dalton wiped rain from his forehead, glancing around the room before fixing his gaze on Ethan. "I'll keep it simple. The bank's not going to extend your loan anymore. You're 3 months behind. If you don't come up with a payment by the end of the month, the farm goes up for auction." My stomach dropped. I looked at Ethan, but his face didn't move, didn't crack. Only his hands betrayed him, tightening into fists at his sides. "You think coming out here in the middle of a storm makes this any easier?" Ethan said, his voice like steel. Dalton smirked. "I think it makes it clear we're serious. You've held on longer than most, but it's over, unless you find someone willing to bail you out." His eyes flicked briefly to me before returning to Ethan. "But I don't see that happening." The message hung in the air like a knife. Without another word, Dalton left, the door slamming behind him. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. I finally spoke, my voice unsteady. "Ethan, why didn't you tell me?" He sat back down, his shoulders slumping for the first time since I'd known him. "Because it's not your problem. This farm, this debt, it's mine. But you've been carrying it alone, I said, my chest aching. You don't have to. His eyes met mine then, and for once, I saw past the walls. I saw the exhaustion, the fear, the weight of a man who had given everything to a piece of land that was slipping away from him. I don't need your pity, he said, but his voice was softer now. It's not pity, I whispered. It's something else. The air between us thickened. My heart pounded, every nerve in my body screaming at me to say it, to admit what I felt. But just as I opened my mouth, the lights flickered, then went out, plunging us into darkness. The storm raged outside, the house groaning under its weight. In the dark, I felt him move closer, his presence filling the space. My breath caught when his hand brushed mine, tentative but deliberate. You don't know what you're getting into, he said, his voice barely above the storm. Maybe not, I whispered back, but I know what I want. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then, in the dark, I felt him lean in, his breath warm against my face. But before our lips could meet, a loud crash shook the house, the sound of glass shattering from a barn. Ethan pulled back instantly, his body tense. The barn, he muttered, grabbing a flashlight. He glanced at me, his eyes burning even in the dark. Stay here. But I couldn't. As he rushed into the storm, I followed, my heart racing with more than just fear, because I knew then that the barn wasn't the only thing breaking apart. It was the walls between us. The storm howled as we sprinted toward the barn, rain slashing sideways, mud pulling at my boots like it wanted to hold me back. Ethan's flashlight beam cut across the night in jagged bursts, catching glimpses of broken glass and flailing shadows. My lungs burned, but adrenaline shoved me forward. When we reached the barn, the big sliding door was hanging crooked, one side ripped off its track. The wind had forced it open, and now it slammed back and forth with every gust, threatening to tear the entire structure apart. Inside, I could hear the frantic shuffling of animals. A horse whinnied, panicked. Ethan pushed past me, his body low, his movements quick but deliberate. "Help me close this door," he shouted. I grabbed the other side, the wood heavy and slick beneath my hands. Together, we heaved against the storm, shoving until the latch caught. Rain pelted my face, lightning lit up the rafters, but for the first time since the chaos began, I felt anchored, because he was beside me. Inside the barn, the air was thick with hay and fear. Chickens clucked frantically in their coop. The horses stomped against their stalls. Ethan moved quickly, calming the animals with practiced hands. I followed his lead, though my movements were clumsy, my hands trembling. "Easy, girl," Ethan murmured one of the Mars, his voice low, steady, grounding. I watched the way he stroked her neck, the storm fading just enough to let me see him clearly. His face was cut by shadows, but his eyes burned with determination. And something else. When the animals finally settled, the barn grew quiet again, save for the hammer of rain on the roof. I exhaled, my body shaking with exhaustion. Ethan leaned against the post, pulling off his soaked shirt and wringing it out. The sight of him bare-chested in the dim light hit me like a punch. Muscles taut, skin glistening, the scar across his shoulder catching the glow of the lantern he'd lit. I looked away too quickly, but not before he caught me. His eyes lingered, curious, unreadable. "You didn't have to come out here," he said finally, his voice low. "I couldn't just let you face it alone." I shot back, my words sharper than I intended. He tilted his head, studying me. "You keep saying that I don't have to do things alone. But you don't understand, that's all I've ever known." I swallowed hard, my chest aching. Then maybe it's time that changes. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to fade. The barn felt smaller, tighter, as if the air between us had thickened. His eyes locked onto mine, and I swore the world tilted. But then he stepped back, pulling on his damn shirt again, the walls slamming back into place. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be worse." The words cut, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. I wanted push, to demand he stop running, but the exhaustion and the weight of everything pressed me silent. We trudged back to the house, dripping, leaving muddy footprints across the porch. Inside, the storm still rattled the windows, but the house felt strangely warm after the chaos. I peeled off my wet clothes, wrapping myself in a blanket, but sleep refused to come. My mind replayed every second in the barn, the touch of his voice on the animals, the sight of his bare skin, the way his eyes had burned into me before he turned away. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a heavy stillness. The fields glistened with water, the air thick with the smell of wet earth. Ethan was already outside when I woke, hammer in hand, fixing the door on the barn. His bandaged arm was exposed, but he worked like a man unwilling to acknowledge pain. I walked up to him, the words bursting out before I could stop them. "Why do you always push me away?" He paused mid-swing, the hammer frozen in the air. Slowly, he lowered it, his back still to me, because getting close to me means getting close to all of this. He gestured to the broken barn, the muddy fields, the land that seemed to demand every ounce of him. And I don't want you to carry that weight. My throat tightened. What if I want to? He turned then, his eyes dark, his jaw tense. "You don't know what you're saying." "Maybe I do." I snapped. "Maybe I know exactly what I'm saying. I didn't come here to pity you, Ethan. I came here because—" I stopped, the words choking me. Because I wanted him? Because I couldn't stop thinking about him? Because the way he looked at me in the storm had changed everything? His gaze softened just slightly. Because what? I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, a truck pulled up the dirt road, its engine growling. We both turned as Dalton, the banker from the night before, stepped out, this time with another man in a sharp suit. Ethan's body stiffened, his hands curling into fists. "What the hell now?" he muttered. Dalton smiled thinly as he approached. "Morning. Just thought we'd check on you after the storm. Shame about the damage. Makes it harder to keep up, doesn't it?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "You didn't come here to check on me." The suited man stepped forward. "We came to give you one last chance. Sell the farm willingly, and you'll walk away with enough to start fresh somewhere else. Hold on, and you'll lose everything." The words hung heavy in the morning air. I looked at Ethan, his shoulders taut, his face unreadable. But I could see it, the war inside him. "No deal," he said finally, his voice firm. Dalton's smirk widened. "Stubborn as always. We'll see how long that lasts." He tipped his hat and turned back to the truck. As they drove away, the silence between us was deafening. Ethan's chest rose and fell, his hands trembling slightly. For the first time, he looked not unbreakable, but human. I stepped closer, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to fight this alone." His eyes met mine then, raw, unguarded. And for once, he didn't look away. He didn't hide. Instead, he whispered, almost broken, "I don't know if I can keep fighting at all." I reached out, my hand brushing his, tentative but steady. The connection jolted through me, electric, undeniable. "You can?" I said softly. "Because I'll fight with you." The world seemed to stop. His breath caught. His eyes flicked to my lips, and for the first time, he didn't pull back. But just as the moment tilted towards something inevitable, a loud crack split the air behind us. The sound of another fence giving way in the distance. Ethan cursed, pulling his hand back, the walls slamming up again. "Come on," he said, grabbing his tools. And just like that, the moment was gone, swallowed by the demands of the farm. But I knew now, the walls might still be there, but they were cracking, and sooner or later, something would break. The days that followed blurred together, work, sweat, and silence. Ethan and I went through the motions of repairing storm damage, fixing fences, and tending to land. On the surface, it was the same as always, his steady commands, my determination to keep up. But beneath it, everything had shifted. Every look lingered too long. Every brush of his hand against mine carried a weight neither of us could ignore. The walls between us had cracked wide open, and though he kept trying to build them back up, I could see through them now. It all came to a head one evening, when the sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple, the fields bathed in the soft glow of sunset. We were walking back from a north pasture, our boots crunching against the dirt road. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and corn stalks, and for once, neither of us spoke. Finally, I stopped, My chest tightened as I forced the words out. Ethan, I can't keep pretending nothing's happening. He froze, his back to me, shoulders tense. Slowly, he turned, his face shadowed by the fading light. What do you think is happening? My heart hammered, but I didn't look away. You know what? The way you look at me, the way I feel when you're near. I'm not imagining it. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then he exhaled, his voice rough. You're not imagining it. The confession hit me like a wave, relief and fear colliding in my chest. Then why do you keep running from it? His eyes burned into mine, raw and unguarded. Because wanting you feels like the one thing I can't afford. I've spent my whole life fighting to hold this place together. And every time I let someone close, I lose more than I can bear. If I let you in and it falls apart. His voice broke. I don't know if I'd survive that. I stepped closer, my voice trembling, but steady. But what if letting me in is the only way you make it through? The last of the sunlight faded, leaving us in twilight. He stared at me, his jaw clenched, his body rigid. For a second, I thought he'd push me away again. But then, with a shuddering breath, he closed the distance. His hand cupped the side of my face, rough and warm, and before I could think, his lips crashed against mine. It wasn't gentle. It was raw, desperate, years of silence and restraint breaking all at once. My hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer as the world spun. The kiss was fire and rain, chaos and peace all at once. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, his forehead rested against mine. I can't promise this will be easy, he whispered. I can't promise the far will survive, or that I'll know how to be what you need. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. I don't need promises, Ethan. I just need you. For the first time since I'd met him, his face softened completely. The weight he always carried seemed to lift, just a little, replaced by something fragile but real. The next weeks were still hard. The bank still loomed. The farm still demanded everything we had. But something had changed. We worked side by side, no longer pretending. In the cornfield, in the barn, in the quiet of the farmhouse at night, we found a rhythm that was ours alone. And though the future was uncertain, one truth anchored me. I hadn't just found a job or a place to belong. I'd found him, standing together in the cornfield where it all began. Ethan lifted his shirt again to wipe the sweat from his brow. But this time, when his eyes met mine, neither of us looked away. We didn't have to.